Welcome. I'm Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows, your hostess for the next 26 weeks in a very special series which is close to my heart, The Secret Gospel of Jesus the Christ. Of course, secret does not always mean books that we have not had access to, such as manuscripts from the Roman archives or from the underground archives of Dubonnet. It also means a deeper and mystical teaching. And for the first time, I'm going to take the lost gospel and the secret gospel, as it is now called, which comes from the archives of the Roman Vatican, and I am going to combine it with trying to help you to understand the reason why Jesus taught the secrets of our earthly mother and our heavenly Father. I hope that you will be with us this next 26 weeks in this wonderful odyssey that will help you to know who you are, what you are, and that the world will forever be. Welcome to the Secret Gospel of Jesus of Nazareth. I'm Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows, your hostess. This is another journey into the world of Christian mysticism, dealing with the secret teachings of Christianity. We ask ourselves many times, why is this considered secret teachings? We have to start our story back a long time ago, actually about 3 centuries after the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. Dean Dudley wrote probably the best book on what took place at Constantinople in 325. I have it here in this reprinted form. It's very old and has been almost impossible to obtain. Fortunately now it has been reprinted by another company and will be easier for those who might be interested in it. It was written in the 1800s, actually in 1886. I asked myself, why would a lawyer, Dean Dudley, have such a fascination for the council or the synod or convention at Constantinople? I finally decided that probably the reason that he did was because it was like a court case in which the powerful Arians had come before Constantine at Constantinople in opposition to the bishops. The story started actually shortly before that, when Constantine, out with his army, saw a cross at high noon. He felt this was a sign from Jesus that he was supposed to become a Christian nation. Not wanting division between the people, he had to face the fact that there were 2 factions. One, the powerful Arians, as I have already mentioned, and of course certainly the bishops. So he decided that he would resolve the issue once and for all by having the great convention at Constantinople. So the 2 factions came together in argument upon the council floor. The Arians, of course, said their teachings were the greater teachings and that they had maintained the purity of the teachings of Jesus. The bishops, on the other hand, said we are the anointed that consecrated. Jesus consecrated, baptized, and anointed his disciples. His disciples, in turn, anointed bishops and ministers. Therefore, we are direct descendants to those truths which were given by the Master. As this proceeded, the Arians lost, and of course certainly the bishops won. It was at that moment of time decided that the teachings, some of them, were just too secret for mass consciousness. Do I condemn this or criticize this? I don't think so. I think when we look at a modern world which is filled with war, lack of understanding, when we cannot even get along with our neighbors, and when we don't even really understand the word mystical, how many times I've heard that word called cult, and yet at the same time mystical means deep and inner, not convictions, but experiences through direct contact with someone like Jesus or through God himself. Thus, mysticism has always represented a part of the higher teaching of every religion and philosophy that has ever existed. And it was not to be any different with Christianity. Jesus mentions this in the Gospels, if you remember correctly, where he said to his disciples when they asked him, "Why do you speak in parable or in mystery?" And Jesus said, "Because it is given to you to understand, but to them it is not." So the secret teaching has always existed, but it became even more secret and buried after this Constantinople, after the Synod at Constantinople. In fact, as we go back to some of the early bishops, in the Apostolic Constitution attributed to St. Clement, Bishop of Rome, describes the early rule of the Church. These regulations must on no account be communicated to all sorts of persons because of the mysteries contained therein. It also relates to a deacon's duty to keep the doors locked so that no uninitiated could enter, that the mysteries were open to fidels or faithful only, and no spectators were allowed at the communion. And when we think of communion, we think of that communion that we have on the special holy days in which we partake of the bread and wine and share that communion with the Christ on each of the holidays. But communion is so very special because it deals with the relationship between people, between organizations. Communion is the ability to communicate. We will never take away from the great mysteries, however, of the Holy Communion, which, of course, was reflected in the Last Supper. Tertullian, who died in AD 216, said in his Apology, "None are admitted to the religious mysteries without an oath of secrecy. We are especially bound to this caution, because if we prove faithless, we shall not only provoke heaven, but draw upon our heads the utmost rigor of human displeasure. Far hence, ye profane, is the prohibition of all holy mysteries." Clement, Bishop of Alexandria, of Alexandria, in AD 150, said in his Stramatis, he cannot explain the mysteries, because he should therefore, according to an old proverb, put a sword in the hands of a child. St. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, born AD in 347, mentions in one of his discourses, "Having dismissed the catechumens, we have retained only you, our hearers, because besides these things, which belong to all Christians in common, we are not to discourse to you of sublime mysteries, which none are qualified to hear, but those who by the Master's favor are made partakers of them." And here, this is a bishop who was in AD 347, yet he is still talking about sublime mysteries which none are qualified to hear except those who by the Master's favor are made partakers of them. Is it then possible that there is a deep and inner mystical relationship that goes beyond the boundaries of fundamental religion and philosophy, in which a person can actually come into direct communication with the Master? Yes, Jesus has appeared to me innumerable times. Yes, he has been there to guide me, and yes, he sent an angelic being to become my teacher and to teach me in his ways. That angelic being came in 1971. And since that time, I have been guided by that kingdom into the very heart of the mysteries that are so hidden by the early bishops. Are they still hidden in the Roman Vatican? I think to some degree, yes. Because certainly the most secret of Jesus's teachings, called the Secret Gospel, is a Roman Vatican manuscript. I do not know that the mysteries as they were understood in those first 3 centuries after the crucifixion are understood that clearly or defined that clearly in the Roman Vatican today. I do know the cardinals are initiated along the pathway of the Via Dolorosa, which is, of course, the greatest mystery of Christendom. It is the greatest mystery because it pertains to the resurrection of the dead. In past episodes and programs, we have taught basically the mystery of the resurrection of the dead, but not so much in how to achieve it. And that's what the secret gospel is all about, giving us a way and a means by which all of us can enter into the resurrection. It is still common among the Christian world today to look at the aspect that I've been saved as being sufficient for spiritual progression. But it is not. Saved is that first step that we take up that long ladder of spiritual progression. And we talk not about our job progression or worldly progression, but soul progression. Whenever we accept a master as an ideal who is greater than we are ourselves, we have taken the first step on the pathway of God. And no one taught a closer and more thorough relationship with God the Father than Jesus himself did. And Jesus taught not only that these things which he could do, we could do and greater, but he also taught that oneness with God. His first commandment was to love God. So therefore, a direct relationship with God the Father, who is the consciousness of 150 billion known galaxies, is within the power of each of us. And it is this connection with God. Man and God in union give birth to the Son of God from themselves. So inside of us is that manger, that crib that holds that great and secret light which we must resurrect. That is what the resurrection of the dead is all about. Resurrecting that divine spark that has dwelt in us forever, raising him from the dead, restoring him to his heavenly abode, that we, the soul, can come into then the holy marriage with the Christ and walk one with God throughout eternity. And that is what we all want. That is where peace rests, in our ability to become one with God. But we cannot become one with God except through raising the Christ in us, through the resurrection of the dead. Because when God created this vast universe, he planted a very special part of himself in each of us. That part is called his Son. It is the light of consciousness, the light of life. And unto this light, God has given all power. So for us to come to oneness with the omnipotent and omnipresent, we must do this through the personal Christ within us. So that is the great secret and the mystery. But how to do this? What can we do in order to raise our souls from the dead? Because so many things go with this. You're going to learn in this course that there are so many powers that we have access, that we can utilize to make our lives fuller and better. The power of healing, the power of discernment, the power of prophecy. All these are a part that comes to every human who has entered unto the resurrection of the dead. And I do want you to know that every human, every man, woman, and child must one day and will one day enter into the resurrection of the dead. God did not just plant his Son in individuals, special individuals, but his Son lives through, as the life form through light consciousness of every human being. So it is no wonder that the early bishops were afraid to allow this to get out to the masses. Perhaps the reason of some of them was selfish. But on the other hand, to have put the powers that are available to us today into the hands of people who did not even understand the nature of the universe, and certainly not the nature of God, was indeed to put a weapon in the hands of a child. So things are different now. Therefore, I do not condemn the secret teachings having been kept secret or mystery throughout the centuries. But we are now a generation who can read and write. We can no longer sit here as they did in ancient times and perceive that our earth is the center of the universe and that God in 7 weekdays created this one single planet and that everything, the sun and the worlds, revolve around it. This was, of course, the belief in the early days of Galileo and Copernicus. And it was heresy to say any differently. For this reason, we could then think that God would create our earth in 7 weekdays and put it in the center of the universe and put Jesus of Nazareth, his only begotten Son, on this one single planet in 150 billion galaxies. No, we are wiser now. We can read and write. We know that this planet has progressed through 6 complete epochs, because the resurrection of the dead in mankind will herald the 7th and final epoch of human progression upon this planet. So we are preparing to enter into that 7th and final epoch. And that it has taken millions and billions of years for this planet to progress and evolve to the degree that it is today. And you're going to be looking at this in the sessions that are to come as we come to understand the nature of God's creation, modified, of course, certainly from Hebrew tongue restored from the teachings of Moses. And looking at its progression as it has passed through the phases until it came into human life. And of course that too has been millions of years ago. St. Chrysostom and St. Augustine speak of initiation more than 50 times. What is initiation? Initiation is orienting you into the secret teachings. I think I can sum up one of these quickly for you by saying, once upon a time, a disciple came to Jesus and asked him when the end would come. And Jesus looked at his disciple and said, "Do you know yet the beginning? For if you know the beginning, you shall know the ending." I do not believe that disciple knew the beginning. And of course there was one other time, there's a little bit funnier, showing Jesus' extreme sense of humor, when someone asked Jesus, "When shall the end come?" And Jesus said, "When women cease to bear children." You'll find that, of course, in the Gospel of Thomas. But that is true also. But what we're looking at is, if you know the beginning, you know the ending. Because Neil Armstrong, from his journey into outer space, said that man cannot understand his destiny until he can understand the nature of the universe. Therefore, how can we as a people know where we're going and what's going to happen to us if we cannot even understand the earth upon which we live? And that's what we're going to find out as we weave into the secret gospel of Jesus of Nazareth. We're going to learn the mysteries of nature and the mysteries of earth, as well as a path which will lead us into the resurrection of the dead. St. Ambrose writes to those who are initiated, and initiation was not merely baptism or admission to the church, but it referred to the mysteries. The greater truths of religion were unveiled only to the baptized and the initiated, and kept secret from the catechumens or the masses, who were permitted to hear the scriptures read and ordinary discourse delivered. The secret teachings reserved for the faithful was never discussed. And when services and prayers ended, the catechumens and spectators withdrew. Theodoret, Bishop of Serapolis of Syria, born in AD 393, in one of his 3 dialogues called Immutable, he introduces the Orthodox, saying, "Answer me, if you please, in mystical and obscure terms, for perhaps there are some persons present who are not initiated into the mysteries. We do not want you to be among those not initiated into the mysteries. And as we journey through this series, I promise you we will take care of initiating you. Some of the work that we have, we mentioned Jean Dudley. This is a rather controversial book. It's called The Secret Instructions of the Society of Jesus. I have read it many times, and to me there is a foundation of truth. Whenever I find something repeated 6, 7, 8, 9 times, I look at it very seriously. And things that are herein written are indicated in so many other manuscripts that I have to give credit at least to some of this. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, but I am saying there is merit. And certainly it correlates, much of it correlates with a great deal of the material I have studied. This was an eyewitness account to the crucifixion of Jesus. He was an Essene. And he was contacted by the Essene Brethren asking him, and I think the Essene Brethren, if I remember, were in Alexandria, asking him if Jesus had been one of them, because they had heard of the miracles which Jesus had done, and they'd also heard that he was one of them. And so as a result of this, the letter is written back by this Essene in Jerusalem 7 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. He writes back to tell them that yes, Jesus had been a member of the Essene sect, and he put in here not only as the eyewitness of the crucifixion, but he also told about Jesus' entry into the society of the Essenes when Jesus was about 13 years old. This correlates with many other manuscripts that I have touched on through the years. And because of the unknown gospel, or what we call the secret gospel of Jesus of Nazareth, which was written by John the Beloved, who did Revelation, who did the Acts of John and the Apocryphal, who did certainly the Gospel of John in our traditional Bible, there is just little doubt, because John's manuscript correlates so perfectly with the Essene teachings. So he himself had to be initiated. I think one of the greatest things was the Essenes themselves had sworn their initiates to secrecy, never to reveal their angelology. And what this secret testament has done is reveal the angelology of the Essenes. And the angelology is so necessary to us, or such a remarkable tool to us to use in this journey toward the resurrection of the dead. From my own perspective, I believe that everything can be done so simply, and that just the love in a person's heart for God is alone sufficient to take them into the resurrection, if that love is pure. If you remember in St. Matthew, when Jesus is giving his Sermon on the Mount, he talks about that the pure of heart will see God. And I hear people all over the world saying you cannot see God, only Jesus could see God, or only if someone else worshipped another master, only they saw God. Oh, people, God is our Father. He is everywhere with us. He is in the space that surrounds us. He is the consciousness that gives us life. How is it possible that we as a human being cannot see God? Every one of us can not only see God, but we can communicate and talk to him, and if we'll let him guide our path, I promise you we will have much more exciting lives than what we have now. The things I have found about walking the pathway of God is that he is forever loving, forever patient, and he is exciting, because he always brings to us each day new challenges, He is also, at times, a taskmaster. We do not escape with anything because that part of him that lives inside of us, that we call his Son or the Christ in us, that part of God that is inside of us has seen everything that we've ever done and everything that we will do. And God so designed it that every human being would enter unto the resurrection. And what is so important about the resurrection of the dead? Raising he who has been dead in us and restoring him to his heavenly abode. What is so important of this? Because he is our greatness. He is the one that holds and possesses all the powers. He is the one that makes us teachers and healers and prophets. We, a mortal, corporeal human being, we do not have these kind of powers. So, and it isn't just for the sake of the powers that we go, it's for the sake of feeling the unity with God the Father, oneness with the whole universe. I wish I could pass on to you that feeling of what it's like to walk in harmony with God, to have him help you with the groceries and wheel the grocery basket. That sounds mundane, doesn't it? But he does. He watches over us with everything that we buy, and sometimes and you ask him this. You try this when you're in a store next time. Close your eyes and for a moment just go upward to God and say, Elizabeth told me you would help me push the basket just to show me that you're as close as she says you are. And you will find that there's lightness that will come to you. Your basket will almost run away. It will be almost weightless. He may only do this for a fraction of a second or a part of a minute, but enough to let you know how close he is. Love, when Jesus said the pure of heart will see God, he wasn't talking about how we have to be someone great and noble and someone who has been on bended knees for the whole of our lifetime. He's talking about those that can just love purely. And if you've ever loved anyone enough to die for them, you know what pure love is. And to love God, to want to serve him, and to be a part of his kingdom, and to walk hand in hand with great masters like Jesus. I've only had one dream in my own lifetime, and that is to serve on the great ball team up in the sky, wherever God sends me, whatever he wants me to do, and where I can be an asset to people like Jesus of Nazareth. But perhaps my time is not yet to leave earth, and maybe when I have, maybe I'll get an opportunity to at least try out on the big ball team. In the meantime, the resurrection is your seat of greatness. It is everything that you have ever wanted. It is not just the powers, but it is the perfect love, the perfect contentment, and it alone is alone sufficient. And time ceases to exist. It is only timeless. And although the body may age, inside you are as ageless as the winds. And that's what counts, as what you are inside. I sometimes forget I'm even getting older until I look in the mirror, because there isn't any age. It's just like a part of the tides of the sea. All this is yours, never to fear again, never to die again. Well, that doesn't mean the corporeal body will not die, but death is thinking that we're going to be put in the burial ground in earth, and our souls will never be in the burial ground of earth. For God built us as eternal as the winds and more powerful than the mountains. So all this in the weeks ahead we're going to learn as we go through the secret gospel of Jesus. We'll talk a little bit about the Essene sect, because as we begin in our next episode, we're going to start with Jesus' teachings on health and nutrition, because it was always recommended that the body be purified first. And the reason for this is, when we have raised the dead, that divine light, we have restored to the heavenly abode, he descends again to take possession of the soul, the emotions, the feeling, and the body. And when the body is filled with vibrations, gross vibrations, or slow vibration, as I prefer to call them, the fight, the war and battle between that which is human and divine is much more intense. Thus it is, as the body is refined, a more light can enter into the body, and there is less restriction for that divine light, the more harmonious things become for us. So therefore it was the custom of ancient times to first purify the physical body. We're not talking about the ancient times of the Jewish people or of Israel. We're talking about the initiates of mystery schools throughout the centuries, including those that Jesus taught his disciples. We did not know in the past that Jesus taught his disciples such a simple fare, but you're going to learn that, and how to transmute this body into a finer vibration, which will bring you also greater peace. You will lose some of the anger that you have. You will be more harmonious. And above all, your longevity of life will be longer. Your health will hold itself for longer periods. There are so many reasons to enter into that first phase of health and nutrition. Jesus, according to most of the accounts that I have read in many manuscripts from all over the world, seems to have entered the Essene sect at about the age of 13. At the age of 12, when he started his discourse in the temple, and I say started it because he was one of those people that was, of course, so brilliant. And at the age of 12, because of his divinity, he attracted the attention of priests and rabbis. Very few people know that they really plotted to take his life at the age of 12 after his appearance in the temple, because once again, the way he questioned the doctors of the law, and of course he was a student of the great Gamaliel, and any student of Gamaliel was welcome in any circle of the law. So he asked questions that were so astute, and they answered them, that he attracted, of course, people all around him who listened to these dialogues that were taking place. And of course, when his parents found him there, they were deeply concerned, and particularly Joseph, because Joseph was afraid that they would single Jesus out as the possible Messiah. Well, that had been done. And as I said, there were plots at that time to take his life. So he had to be taken to safety. And we know that, of course, that these were lost years. We call them the lost years. But there's one thing about history, and that is nothing is ever completely lost, just misplaced for a while. So Joseph, who himself was accredited to being an Essene, although Mary was of traditional Judaic, Joseph took Jesus to the Essene monastic community at Qumran to be raised. Even though they knew who and what he was given no special privileges, and he did work as a carpenter for the Essene sect. And it's my understanding that he was particularly good in the cabinet making, in that very fine work. Because in the Essene monastic community, everybody worked for the good of the whole. They took their talents, if they could cook, if they were a carpenter, if they were a shoemaker, they made shoes for everyone in the community, they sewed for everyone in the community. So Jesus' assignment, of course, was to do carpentry work. His father was a carpenter that was known all over Israel, and it was natural that he had taught all of his sons. And I say all of his sons because Jesus had 2 half-brothers and 2 half-sisters. I'm sorry, 3, I think. I think Joseph had 6 children prior to the advent of Jesus. And so he had taught them all in cabinet making and in the carpentry business. So Jesus is taken to the Essenes, where he could study in one of the rare things in Judaic at that time, and that is the master-disciple relationship. That was not a common relationship in Israel. Normally it was students and doctors of the law, where the students would come and listen to the doctors of the law discourse on the law of Moses, each interpreting it according to their own understanding. So Jesus, though, as going to the Essene sect, dealt with master-disciple relationship, much like it was in the ancient days of Egypt and in the mystery schools of Egypt and Karnak, Luxor, Zarathustra, Zoroastrian times, India, which is common master-disciple. And if you watched the series that we run on the life and secret teachings of Jesus, you would find most definitely that he certainly had gone and studied in the East. But anyway, master-disciple relationship existed in the Essenes after the manner of the early mystery schools. The Essenes had withdrawn from the Jewish sect because they felt that the teachings of Moses were watered down. They had become transparent, ritualistic, and no longer had the depth. Because depth means not discoursing on the law or the scripture, but living it. Going into the deep mystical aspects of yourself, the hidden passageway which leads to that divine nature. Moses taught that. He taught rules and laws by which we could reach this great estate. However, by the time that it had been interpreted again, they no longer had the same force and power that they'd had during the time of Moses. So the Essenes themselves went in to restore the teachings of Moses. They withdrew from the Judaic. They went to the rivers and streams where they could purify their bodies, purify their minds, purify their emotions. And not all of the Essenes were monastic at Qumran. Many communities were outside of Qumran, where groups of Essenes lived together by the water, like certainly along the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, certainly at Carmel. All of these were places where the Essenes inhabited. And why is it not mentioned in the Bible, the word Essenes? It is hard to understand why not, because you see, the Essenes existed 325 years before the time that Jesus advented. They disbanded during that first century after the crucifixion as persecution became so predominant among those who believed differently than the powers of both Israel and Rome. So for 400 years, or almost 400 years, the Essene sect was a remarkable symbol on the deserts of Israel. In fact, many of them sat in the Sanhedrin Council. Even Herod had the greatest respect for the Essenes because it had been prophesied by one of the early Essene prophets when Herod was just a young boy, that he would one day become ruler of Israel. And Herod thought that was rather ridiculous at the time. But of course, as you well know, Herod the Great did become the ruler of Israel. This had been prophesied by ancient Essenes. But there was so much jealousy after the crucifixion that everything that was to relate to anything that was not to be the way people had to believe was eliminated. Caiaphas, the high priest, in fact, was so afraid that Jesus' body would disappear that when it did disappear, he paid his soldiers money to say that the disciples had come and taken Jesus' body away, because the one thing that he feared the most was that Jesus' body would disappear. So there was so much secrecy and jealousy and envy. And the Essenes were very quiet. They blended in with wherever and whomever they were with. And they sought much to protect their lives. And we know a great deal more about the hours that they spent creating the scrolls as we have looked into the Dead Sea Scrolls. But for most part, people who wanted to come into the Essene monastic community had to live on the outside and purify the body and temper the emotions for a period of 3 years before they were allowed to come on the more inner circle. You can imagine how difficult it is to live on the outside of a community such as this, trying to discipline yourself not to be angry, to still your passions, not to be gluttonous, to obey all of the very principles that lead to a healthy body and a healthy mind by yourself. And so many could not endure. But it was the test that the Essenes required, and particularly the purification of the body. When 3 years had been lived well, then they were allowed to come in, the initiates were allowed to come in then for 7 years on the next inner circle. Even then, they were not on the most inner circle. For 7 years they practiced, and they were initiated into the communions with the angels, which are utilization of the forces of natural and cosmic law, which would bring about the transformation of human to divine, or the resurrection of the dead. And how many of those may have achieved this, we will never know. But what we do know is that their way led and leads perfectly to a great transformational change. So Jesus, at the age of 12 years old, is taken to the Essenes, where it is apparent he lived until the age of 19, working as a carpenter, studying with the Essenes, accepting the master-disciple relationship from the elders, who were the central core of the Essene monastic community. And as a result, he passed this on, he must have passed this on to his disciples, because we find so much of it written in the secret gospel. Following Moses' illumination on Mount Sinai, the illustrious Hebrew leader sought to establish a code of living based upon the forces of nature and the invisible force of the cosmos. And this proved to be no easy task, for the people were illiterate, childlike, and easily moved to dissension during difficult periods. One set of principle was taught to the masses. The deeper mysteries were revealed to the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. This became known as the Hebrew Kabbalah. It was, of course, the source and core of Hebrew mysticism, which is the mother and father of Christian mysticism. For Jesus, too, taught an outer teachings to the people and a hidden and secret teachings to the inner circle. And his inner circle was more than just the 12 disciples. There were many of his family, and not so much friends, but when we think of Mary Magdalene and Martha, Lazarus, and their families, and Peter and his family, some of them were married, some were. The extension of Jesus' inner circle expands considerably beyond just the 12 disciples themselves. However, of course, it was the 12 disciples that could travel with him, because it was very awkward to have women to travel in great distances in mixed company. So the secret rites pertaining to the soul's monumental task of evolving to human divine were contained in the room of the holy. And I'm going to kind of talk about for a moment the Mosaic mysteries, because it was the tabernacle in the wilderness was theoretically measurable and measured the same as the pyramid of Egypt, symbolically and theoretically. And it was built into 3 compartments. The first compartment, the outside court, represented the mass consciousness of the people upon the earth. The inner court, which was the holy room, the holy room of the holy, it contained within it the 7-pronged candlestick and 12 loaves of shewbread, 2 stacks of 6, representing that divine spark in us that was incarnate into the world of matter, the 6th cycle of creative progression. The soul, also in the sixth epoch, being human, these two wandered in the human body. They would have to come together into oneness through the transformation of human to divine, of which was revealed by the laws of creation, which was symbolized in the seven-pronged candlestick, constituting in part a part of the mysteries that would hold in Christianity and certainly in St. John's Apocalypse. So we are going to look at the material of the communions with the angels that we're going to be covering in the weeks that are ahead. I like to think of them as the proper utilization of power. In Jesus' day, they could not understand the Son as a power. They could only understand the Son as an angel. So as a result, they could pray, they could acknowledge the power of water as an angel, sun as angel, power of God must be an angel, love must be an angel. And so they would solicit the union or communion with that particular force through the practice of the angelology. And it was by the shores of the river that the weary and afflicted came again to see Jesus. And like children, they had forgotten the law. And like children, they sought out their Father to show them where they had erred and to set their feet straight again. And when the sun rose over the earth's rim, they saw Jesus coming toward them from the mountain with the brightness of the rising sun about his head. And he raised his hand and smiled upon them, saying, "Peace be with you." Many were ashamed to return his greeting, for each in his own way had transgressed the law, and the angels of earth and heaven were not with them. One man who suffered grievously looked up and spoke, "Master, we are in sore need of your wisdom, for we know that which is good, and yet we follow evil. We know that to enter the kingdom of heaven, we must walk with the angels of day and night, and yet our feet walk with the wicked. The light of day shines only on our pursuit of pleasure, and the night falls upon our heedless stupor. Tell us, Master, how may we walk with the angels and stay within their holy circle, and that the law may burn in our hearts in constant flame?" And Jesus spoke to them and said, "To lift your eyes to heaven when all men's eyes are on the ground is not easy. To worship at the feet of angels when all men worship only fame and riches is not easy. But the most difficult of all is to think the thoughts of angels, to speak the word of angels, and to do as the angels do." And we will be learning we will be taking a journey into the power of God as we watch the origin of the universe. We will be learning the secret of love which masters every obstacle known to man and overcomes all things. We will be learning how to practice the words of wisdom, what to read, and so that we can change our thinking process. We'll be learning to use the sun to heal with. We'll be learning to come to oneness with God, to use the power of healing, and how to properly use the power of prophecy. We will certainly learn that we are eternal as we watch the creation of not only the universe, but the creation of the world upon which we live and the progression of which we are all bound to. We will be looking at how to bring joy into our life and to bring peace into our life. How to act. Greed, knowing is not the whole answer. We must learn to practice it. We must learn to live it. And so we will only be looking at one single force each week, trying to give you a deeper and abiding understanding so that this can change your life as it has changed so many hundreds, perhaps thousands of people. So I want to invite you to be with me on this wondrous journey into the secret gospel of Jesus the Christ, and let us all become brothers and sisters and one with God. As Jesus said, there shall be no peace upon the earth until there be one brotherhood of man over the whole world. Peace be unto you.